Hey boys and girls, welcome back to Munro Live. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about what we've discovered here on the battery tray and the actual battery modules themselves. But before we get into that, first let me welcome Ben again. And Ben's going to talk to us a little bit about how Ford has decided to attack the cooling. And the one thing I want you to remember is that we had what we thought was a revolutionary new idea. And some of what Ben's going to be talking to you today about as far as how Ford is doing the cooling here with their LG batteries is kind of like very similar to what we were discussing. So Ben, why don't you talk a little bit about the plates and the trough and the runs and everything else.
All right, will do. As we've mentioned before, there are 5 bays in here for battery modules. And inside of each of these bays, there are reinforcements in the bottom that have been self-piercing rivet attached to the battery tray. We have 2 of the cooling plates that are still in place. You can see that there's 2 different sizes. There's a small one up front and then a larger one that would be replicated in the rest of the, for the rest of the modules. There's a gray paste that goes over top of this. This is a thermal interface compound. They use this to help transfer the heat from the battery module into this coolant tray. There are quick connects on each of the cooling trays. They simply snap into place and lock down. It's a very easy assembly for the operator. There are a lot of connection points though, because they are using individual battery trays, or excuse me, individual cooling trays for each of the battery module bays. So there are 10 quick connects in here. So lots of places, a lot of OEMs only have 1 at the front and it's a single coolant path through the entire system. And if we take a look at the underside of these, you will notice that it is dimpled everywhere. There's not a single path, which is what we've seen a lot inside of battery trays. The fluid would come in here and it would be pushed in both directions. So it would come over here and it basically, it's going to follow it's very similar to the Plinko from the game show Price is Right. The fluid's just going to move around here in a random pattern. It's going to cool everything around here, come back around and work its way out on the other side. There is no difference between the larger plates. They are all the same. So there's no way that Ford is managing how much fluid goes through each one of these. So they are just pumping through as much as they can to get the cooling that they need. And once these cooling plates are installed, there are no fasteners that hold these down. You can see the studs that stick through the cooling plate. Those are used to fasten the battery modules down. So the modules are actually holding these cooling plates in place. There's not a separate operation, which is a good way of putting these in here, making one fastener perform multiple jobs.
By the way, something else that's kind of a nice idea is the, as you called it, a Plinko design or something. My first thought was pachinko when I first saw the thing, a very popular game in Japan. But I look at this and see something a little bit different. This is similar, very similar to what we would normally see if we were looking at a cooling plate for the aircraft industry. You like to have not laminar flow, but turbulent flow, so that you can, it actually excites the transfer of heat and cold better if you've got something similar to what they've got on the bottom here with these little dimples. Anyway, so the other thing is, of course, that the ends of this is also these quick connects. Really, I really like them. They are quick and simple to use. And if you have to take them apart, they come apart fairly easily. So let's walk over here and talk a little bit about the battery pack itself. So anyway, this has been taken apart, and the first thing that I think is kind of important is that we're looking at something extremely similar to what you see on the Chevy Bolt. Now, LG makes the battery packs for Ford, and they make them for the Chevy Bolt as well, Bolt I should say. And if you look at them, they even use the same color tape. So this is from the Bolt, and this is from the Mach-E. So good news there is that it's very similar. The biggest change that I've seen here is these are the collector plates. These are made out of solid copper, pure copper, and then they're nickel plated. And that's kind of how they transfer the heat. These are the end of the tabs that have been welded to the collector plates. And I thought that it was kind of interesting that when you start looking at it, how clever. This is a nice way of getting the job done. And it's similar to what we saw over on the Bolt. So similar but not the same, because when you flip it over, you're looking here. This is called a ribbon cable, and this is what you'd find on the Bolt. So this is a circuit board. These are a lot more expensive, and it's simple to break these, especially when they're long and skinny like this. With this, I can almost crumple it up in my hand and it'll still work fine. So this is how they're going to be managing the module. And this is, like I say, how they're collecting the current and getting it ready for distribution. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how the product works and what exactly this foam stuff does for them.
All right, I can do that. We'll start over here with one of the components. This is from the Mach-E. This is one of the cells that are on one side. There are two cells normally that would be fastened into one of these. We've removed one. What LG is doing is there is a bent aluminum plate that was put into this injection molded piece here, and that's for the thermal transfer, to transfer the heat out. So you're getting the vertical of both cells going down to the bottom. And then you'll remember where we were looking at the thermal interface compound. This aluminum strip here lines up with the thermal interface compound. If we looked at the bottom of the entire stack, you would see that there's aluminum that's running in the same pattern that the thermal interface compound was. So they're not having to put on that compound everywhere. Like the ID4 had to have a big glob of the interface compound. It's very heavy stuff, it's very expensive. So this limits the use of that material while still being able to wick away the heat from the cells.
So basically what I see here is a much more efficient design than what we saw in the VW. Because the VW has got the whole thing wrapped in aluminum. This one here is cleverly pulling the heat away with a minimum amount of aluminum. So I should mention something else. These cells have been discharged already, so that's why we can touch them. The one thing is that when you discharge a battery or a battery pack like this, if you leave it for a while, it starts to recharge itself chemically. So today we're fooling around with this without gloves on. Tomorrow maybe not. So if you start fooling around with these kinds of things yourself, be aware that will ruin your day if you start cutting or grabbing and it hasn't been professionally discharged. And we actually send them out to have it done. We don't have that capability here. So anyway, I think that there was one other aspect. Oh, the bolts.
The bolts, yep, there's a couple of other pieces here. There is foam that is put in between each of the little packs inside. This is to allow for some expansion of the cells as they grow older. They do need a little bit more space. So the foam keeps everything tight, but you don't want to give it, if you give it too much room, it'll start to delaminate and you can end up with a thermal runaway event if that were to happen. So what they're doing is they're using the foam to allow for some expansion, and then they have these very long fasteners that they can bring all of the pieces together. The end cap on the far side is tapped in the end, at the hole, and they can thread this in, screw them together, and if the other pair of cells were still in here, this would be giving them a tight connection. LG, when they were making the Chevy Bolt, had to have a bolt on the other side. So they had the long fastener still, excuse me, a nut, yes. So they had the long fastener still, but they were using a nut on the far side. So they've eliminated that fastener and incorporated it into the end cap in this case. So there's the fasteners. Sandy talked about the bus bars at the end. This is one of the smaller of the Mach-E batteries from the front. There were a total of 24 cells in this battery. The larger cell, or the larger modules, excuse me, they had 30 cells. Very similar to every other battery we've been looking at. They are running 3 cells in parallel and then running in series throughout the rest of the battery. They do have to have a lot more bus bars when this was put together. If you remember from the video that Sandy and Mark did, there were bus bars running everywhere. One thing that I'm not sure if it was Volkswagen or if it was LG that pushed it on the ID4 was they had that spine going down the middle, so it was a very efficient transfer of energy from one module to the other and being able to put that all together with minimal parts. But on this Mach-E, they're going back to very large bus bars.
So we've just kind of found out that we may be producing a battery pack, a battery pack tray, similar to what we were talking about. And by looking at what we see here on the Ford Mach-E and looking at what we saw on the VW and all the other battery packs that we've come up with, we're going to try and create something we call the best of best design. So we take all the best ideas that we found, kind of conglomerate them together and then put it into play. And I think that after looking here, there's some things we really like, some things we don't much care for, things we saw over on the Volkswagen that we thought were good ideas, things we've seen with Tesla and whatnot. Anyway, we're going to try and put the whole works together to come up with something that will be much more cost effective, much easier to manufacture, and probably in the long run a whole lot better from an energy management standpoint. So this is where we are right now. I think we hit the target.
I think we've covered it all, yes.
Good. So anyway, stay tuned to Munro Live. We're going to be going a little deeper, maybe into some of what you've seen here today in the future, but there'll be lots more that we discover and uncover in the Mach-E. Stay tuned. We'll see you. Oh, and one other thing. I'd like to thank Ford Motor Company for allowing us to come and see the F-150 Lightning. So I'm going to be doing that tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. That should be very interesting. Okay, again, thanks a lot. And keep, should I do the Corey thing? Yes, and if you feel like subscribing, please do, and save me from Corey's wrath. Thanks again. Bye now.